Hey everyone, it's Kai, and today I kind of want to talk about the V format and where it's shaping up to be with the V collection cards, and how it's going to change the entire meta. We did some testing with some of the new reveals and played the format a bit, so I'm kind of going to show you just an update on that and how it's looking, right? And I mean, the format is definitely looking quite strong, surprisingly. I know a lot of people have said that V is kind of like it's like that kind of weird format that no one likes, but so far it's actually looking pretty good. So we'll kind of go into that, but first we're going to look at the Nubatama reveals today, because Nubatama is that polarizing clan. It is either very good or very bad, and most of the time it just doesn't know what it's doing. So it's kind of interesting to see where they're going to take this clan with V collection, especially since the cards that they're showing off are totally new. These aren't usually like in V collections, they're reprinting the old cards with nostalgia, but I think they just ran out of good cards to print, or cards that people know about. So they just printed totally new ones, and let's see how it goes. So the first card is the grade 1. This card is translated as the Martial Artist of Swift Judgment, Horzan. And his first effect is that when this card is placed on the Vanguard circle, you look at the top 7 cards of your deck, pick a grade 2 or high card with Horzan in its name, reveal it to your opponent and shuffle your deck. So, you know, we know that the grade 3 card is Die Horzan, and so now we know the grade 2 is probably a Horzan as well. So it's just going to be Horzan Ride Line. And the second effect is Auto Regard Circle. When this unit attacks or boosts, at the end of the battle that attacks or boosts, choose one of your opponent's regards and bounce it back to their hand. And this effect is actually compulsory. You don't get to not bounce. You have to put one of your opponent's cards to hand. So pretty interesting. We know that the entire ride lane is Horzan, and then it has a bounce effect. So what is this bounce effect going to do? Is it going to bounce and discard, right? Like the Dirty Crow, right? Kokushi Garasu, I think. So interesting. So grade 2, let's take a look at this. This is translated as the Sword Saint of Continuous Victories, Horzan. So it's kind of cool, right? Because this is the young Horzan, then we got the mid-age Horzan. We already know that Dai Horzan is super old looking, so it's like, you know, he's continuing through, getting older, getting stronger, getting more powerful, right? So let's take a look at its effects. So the first effect is Auto Vanguard Circle or Regard Circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, choose one of your opponent's regards and return it to the hand. And if your opponent is grade 2 or higher, for that battle, this unit gets 10k, and this effect is compulsory as well. So all these bounce effects are compulsory. This is so also when you go second, you kind of get some advantage. You get buffed up, so your opponent has to guard harder. And then the second effect is when this unit is ridden upon by a grade 3 unit. If your opponent has 3 or more regards on the field, give your Vanguard +1 crit and +1 drive. So this is punishing your opponent for calling cards early against you, right? So if they rush you, or they just call a lot of cards to their back row to get around some effects, then no, when you ride on top of this, you get the goods, right? You get the crit, you get the drive. Those are some pretty good things to get, you know. This is some pretty good things to get. So that's pretty nice. And then the last card that is being shown is the Undefeated Sword Saint Dai Horzan. So this first effect is Auto on the Vanguard circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, you may Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1, and then bounce one of your opponent's regards. And for this battle, this unit gets +5,000 and +1 drive, right? So another drive check. And then if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or higher, and they have 1 or less regards, then this also gets 10k and a crit. So this is kind of interesting, right? You bounce their stuff, then you get the goods, right? You get the power. If they've, like, interesting thing, if you rode upon grade 2 Horzan, they have a whole field, you can technically ride on top of it, get like a crit and a drive, then you can bounce their stuff back to their hand, and then get another drive and maybe 10k and a crit to that as well. So that's pretty good. You probably don't even care about, you know, striding at this point if you've pulled this off, because you get like what, quad drive, you know, 3 crit plus 15k. Yeah, that's pretty much a stride, right? It's better than a stride, especially when all of your first strides in Nubatama are generally pretty jank. It also has a second effect, and it's Auto on the Vanguard circle. During your opponent's turn, when their normal unit is placed on the Regard circle, they have to discard a card. Well, if their hand is 4 or higher, they have to discard a card from their hand. So that's kind of like a tax, you know? It's kind of like prison, except they have to discard a card, but it's also like jam your Congo, because, you know, if they have 4 more cards, they have to discard technically down to 3, right? If they have exactly 4, they discard down to 3. But the key thing is that it's only when they place units on their turn. So if you force them to call cards from their hands with like a Rene or something like that, then they don't have to discard a card. But you've bounced everything back to their hands. If they actually want to pressure you, they have to call cards down, right? And if they do, then they're forced to discard cards. So this is actually pretty interesting, very interesting effect. Pretty good in all formats, I think, in standard and premium. So it'd be interesting to see how this tests. But, in premium, maybe you can build up a huge hand that you actually don't care about the discard cost. Maybe, but there's always other ways to discard cards in premium. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how this translate. And it's definitely a very interesting effect. Very interesting effect. Surprisingly for Nubatama, usually they just get one-line effects that says discard your opponent's hand out of 4 or whatever, something like that, right? But this one actually has a big text box. So I think this is a really good reveal from for Nubatama, and definitely kind of in line with all the interesting cards that are being released for V Collection set, well, the entire set, right? We'll look at some of these other cards that are being reprinted. So we see some of these cards being reprinted. It's pretty nice. And we also have the Heal Guardian, which is just the same card, but every clan gets a Heal Guardian. So this card is actually, so let's kind of talk about the V format right now and how it's different from before. So with the V format that we know at the moment, it's got a lot of prisms, but it's got a lot of decks that can just randomly kill you when they go first. And half of the idea so far that we're seeing in V Collection is that we're seeing a lot of cards that kind of slightly benefit you if you go second. So if we look at that grade 2 Horzan today, if you go second, you actually have pressure as well. By the way, tomorrow's reveal is Spike Brothers, so make sure. But the Heal Guardian that is coming out actually changes the entire early game quite heavily, right? The Heal Guardian basically stops nearly all form of early turn aggression if you have it in your hand. It's basically like one entire turn your opponent doesn't really do anything, because the two effects it has is actually incredible. So when just in case you don't know, I'm kind of blocking the Heal Guardian look, so I'll kind of move myself. Okay, so if you look at the Heal Guardian, right, it has 2 big effects. The first one is when it's placed on the Guardian circle, and you haven't ridden a grade 3 this fight, you may pick one of the effects below. So for this turn, your Vanguard gets power plus 10,000 power, and then the other effect is that you can choose is one of your opponent's unit gets -2 crit for the battle. So these are both very potent effects, right? They basically say that your opponent, this is basically a sentinel, or it's basically a trigger for the entire turn. And what this means is that if your opponent commits 3 cards onto the field to bash you, like tri-lane you early, they better be hitting over 10k, because that first effect just negates, like the first guard will negate all 3 attacks. If you want to, you can just use the first effect to basically turn this to a 25k trigger, and there's no over triggers in this format, so unfortunately it's nearly unbreakable. Of course, you can always -2 crit your opponent, so even if they kind of hit, they don't do any damage. And at the same time, the other thing is that if you're going second and you're against something like a unit that gets crit when they're on grade 3, aka like Dimension Police, you could actually just -2 crit it so you don't die. Or if you're against a Gabriel that, kind of pings like a bunch of crits on their Hamiel, then you can -2 crit that so you don't die. So anything like that, this basically, it slows down the game quite heavily and forces both players to go into the grade 3 game, playing around at grade 3. What this also means, though, is that you have to, your mulligan style kind of changes quite heavily. If you see this in your hand, you might want to keep it, right? At the same time, things search for it, like your grade 3 searches for it. And another thing also is that it's a grade 3, so it doesn't boost. So bear that in mind. Don't boost with it. it's actually more of an attacker if you want to commit with it. But yeah, it's really, it slows down that portion of the game to the point where you have to ask yourself, like, if you're a Neo-Nectar player, for example, and you commit a whole field of tokens, does this really matter? Because they can put this card down and suddenly, this turn is ended, right? And how many of these do you want to keep? Another thing also is, do I stay at grade 2 against certain decks? It could be something that works, because just how potent this card is. If your opponent is at grade 3, but they're not hitting over like a 10k, hitting over 10k, this basically still buys you another turn if you're going second, right? So actually insane card. I think you know, if you see this in your hand, a lot of times, like, your mulligan style is totally going to change. You're probably going to keep at least one in your hand just so you can perfect guard properly. Well, not really, it's not really a perfect guard, but it just, you know, it grabs you another turn. But it's not like super broken where you're getting like 100 million power, so the turn is actual. If your opponent can actually hit over things, then sure, it's still, they can still punch through, but then, you know, you can kind of stop an attack with a -2 crit to it, right? So kind of, it's really good. The second effect is when it's placed on the rear guard circle and you have no cards in your damage zone, you may put the top card of your deck into your damage zone. So it's against those formats where, like, something like a Ramuel, for example. I mean, we talked about that a lot, where they're trying to 0 to 6 you with an attack. Well, now you at least have 1 CB to play with, and although 1 CB isn't much, it's at least something to do, right? So overall, it at least lets you do something, and just kind of solves a few problems of the entire V format. But I can't like say this enough, right? The first effect for this card is actually insane. It is totally gonna like change. I think it changes the entirety of the game. And you might say, yeah, prisons are really, really strong at the moment because, you know, they can do everything, right? They can draw a billion cards. But one thing here is that with Heal Guardians, like one thing with Prism, right, is that it gets a lot of its advantage also by pressuring you early, and this totally shuts that down. So I think just by this existing, the format is just totally different. It's just totally different. So I think a lot of testing still needs to happen, but just first impressions of Heal Guardians, huge positive for the V format. Probably a huge positive for the premium format as well. But right now, since we're just talking about V, big good. This is a big good, all right? Moving on, let's talk about the clans themselves. So we tested 4 decks so far. First we've tested was Daikai. I have to say Daikai is pretty good. Like, Dimension Police is pretty good. I played it, with all my testing that I've done, I like to play with very simple and standard decks first. But, you know, this one kind of pretty, just, yeah, I played this with Great Dayusha, I think with Sabad, and what was the last card? What was the last grade 3? I totally forgot about the last grade 3 now. It was a 14 grade, oh, it was Heal Guardians, right? The Heal Guardians, oh yeah, one other thing with Heal Guardians, right, is that they grade 3s, so they change the ratios of deck, and for certain decks like Dimension Police, it's actually very, very good, because now you don't have to run random grade 3s that don't do anything. So that means you have like, what, 12 slots that are triggers, that are grade 0 triggers, or 12 slots grade 0 triggers with 1 grade 0, right? So there's 13 slots there. Now your 3s, since this requires you to trigger 3s, but that's solved by having Heal Guardians being 3s as well. So your 3s are 14, you have 14 3s, very, very nice. But now your grade 2s and grade 1s, you have more like slots that you can play with. So you can put more of them there, so you have less chance of being grade sucked. So it's another advantage of Heal Guardians. But yeah, Daikai is very strong. So far, it's just by this card existing, your opponent cannot really Sentinel well, and you can easily just make it so you have 2 Daikais as active at any point in time. So even if your opponent Sentinels, you can still at least, you know, counterblast 2 and ping 1 twice, right? So overall, Daikais are probably one of the stronger Force clans right now, can make multiple attacks too. Against Daikaiser, I've been playing around with the idea of just, if I go first against Daikaiser, I might not want to ride to grade 3 first, just so I can use my Heal Guardian against the Daikaiser on that first turn, and basically try and buy myself an extra turn, right? Because if I ride up to grade 3 first, and then he rides grade 3, his Daikaisers are active, they can like ping me, I don't have Sentinels, I can't really use Sentinels, right? But I also can't use my Heal Guardians, so there's way more pressure. I'm kind of forced to take a crit, or I have to multi-guard, which is not really ideal. So if I stay at grade 2, I could technically just -2 crit the Daikaiser, and it becomes 0. You can trigger a crit, and I mean, sure, deal 1 damage, but it kind of still buys me a few turns before I'm forced to double the guard with Sentinels and things like that, right? So that's just another big thing with, you know, Heal Guardians interactions and mulligans, and just kind of how slightly deeper the V format has become. So this card by itself is very strong. Dimension Plea is also very strong. But just the ways to play against this deck, you also have to kind of think of, because, you know, you can't just double Sentinel every turn. And I mean, when they ride like Great Dayusha on this, they can call this guy out and bam. You know, still, if they had another Daikaiser on the field, it's still 2 Daikaisers per second. There's really no good ways to perfect guard this with just 1, so you have to like double Sentinel, and, you know, it's a big drain on resources. This is a big drain of resources. So yeah, overall, Dimension Police is looking very, very strong. The next one that we're seeing is Vera. So Neo Nectars. This got revealed very quickly on the Friday. This card is very, very good, right? It's very good. So one thing with these 3 attacker decks that we're seeing in V Collection is that they hit huge numbers and they have big crits, I guess. They're very scary. They're very scary. The cool thing about Vera, right, is that this card can super compress your deck very quickly. You can put triggers back into the deck. So ideally, you're putting triggers back into the deck. You're calling non-triggers out, and then you're getting extra drive checks. So you're drive checking your compressed deck very, very strong. You can go force 2 of this to actually put on like force 2 pressure, spread it around. But also, because of the grade 2 Licorice, right? This card, she makes it so that when you call a trigger from her, your Vera gets the trigger effect, right? But then Vera spreads that trigger effect to everyone else in your front row. So it's just very, very scary, right? You could call a heal from Licorice and heal down. You could call a crit and put it on Vera, and then you spread the power. Not just the crit to everyone. Only the power is spread. But you know, it just makes things like, you know, 2 to guarding or 3 to pass a Vera kind of scary. You generally want to just, like, you know, perfect guard it, so you never have that scary situation where you 3 to pass something, they get 3 triggers. They don't have to put it on reguards. They just put the power on the Vanguard, and if it breaks through, it breaks through. If it doesn't, it still spreads the power to everyone. So overall, this is it's just very, very good. It's surprisingly good for a 3 attacker deck. Hits hard, hits fast. It can make a full field very easily with tokens if you wanted to. But of course, if they have a heal guardian, they can kind of shut down the aggression. But overall, just very, very well designed card in my opinion. Very strong. The next clan, well, not the next. This isn't the next one. Next clan we're gonna see is Blockade. So I think a lot of people saw Blockade and went, "This is a very, very boring card. I'm not gonna play it. It just sucks," right? I think a lot of people did underestimate Blockade quite a bit. It's quite decent, I think. It's sure the effect is quite lame, right? It's quite lame. Why? It just retires grade 2s and gets a bunch of power and attacks 3 times only. But that's really what you need. You know, that's really only what you need, right? It gets power. It gets rid of your opponent's cards, so you're forced to call down more cards next turn, only for it to be retired. Like, the retire effect is so simple. If it's a grade 2, it's gone. If they don't have grade 2s, you get a imaginary gift force, and you're basically going force 1, because if your opponent doesn't have any grade 2s, this card just gets a crit. This card becomes 2 crit, right? So it has that kind of pressure. So the overall idea of this card is very simple, only 3 attacks, but it's what I've said before. If it's only a 3 attacker deck, it gets a bunch of power. And it's not like, technically this deck might not be a 3 attacker deck. You can put Dauntless Drive Dragon with this deck, and you can kind of make it a 4 attacker deck at some point. But overall, yeah, I think people kind of underestimated this. You easily hit like 50Ks, your entire front row, and then they have to guard, right? They have to guard at least the Vanguard. But then your other stuff is hitting, you trigger a crit, it's hitting massive numbers. At the same time, your opponent has to commit like cards onto the field. At the same time, you know, you can get rid of their 1s and their 2s, or the 1s and their 3s to turn them into 2s. Or, you know, your grade 1 also can force them to call 2s onto the field, or you draw 2. So overall, I think the deck is just very simple, very straightforward, but it does its job. It's of course not as exciting as the other Force clans that we've seen so far, right? Like Thingsaver's like, whew, it's Thingsaver. It doesn't need to have a good effect. Or Vera, ooh, it's Mini Ultima, right? Or Daikaiser, oh, it's Daikaiser, right? It deals the damage. This one's just, I retire stuff, I get power, I get a crit, big crits, big power. Yeah, that's it. So not exciting, but it's still alright. It's still alright. Versus, like, if we're talking about a format where we're basically fighting at the grade 3 level, where everyone's fighting at the grade 3 level, you won't really have super cheesy wins with Dodex or things like that, in my opinion. So overall, I think, you know, this still has some fighting chance, and you should probably give it a look, like take a look at it, right? Give it a good look. The last clan that we've tested was I'll keep on doing this. The last clan we tested was Angel Feather. We tested Ramuel. We didn't test Thingsaver because, I mean, Thingsaver got revealed ages ago. and it's not as exciting anymore. I mean, maybe we'll test it in the future, but we tested Ramuel. This is a very interesting card. I actually played this deck with only Ramuels as the grade 3. The other grade 3 was the Heal Guardian. In all these decks, we played 4 Heal Guardians just to test it out, and so far they've been pretty good. But yeah, we only tested with Ramuel, just because, yeah, the way I look at this card, I'm just going, who needs anything else? Now, Ramuel is a bit clunky, right? In that you require a certain situation to happen. You require, like, you know, cards on the field to be the same as cards in your damage. But then once you are able to get that going, you snowball pretty hard. Imagine every turn you're drawing 2 cards on top of your Twin Drive. You're standing your whole field. All your reguards are getting 10k each. So they're going to hit massive, right? You get 5 attacks. And then when you get 4 more damage, you can kind of, you know, get good cards into your hand. Like even when you think about it, right? Like a 9k boosted by a 5k, that's 14. But then if you have the same cards in your damage zone and you stand them, they're getting like 10k, right? Like that trigger becomes 15k, that front row becomes 19k. That's hitting like 19 plus 15, 34. Pretty good numbers. Then you get drive checks, right? So overall, once you get those correct, once you get that clunkiness out of the system, right? You're snowballing pretty hard. You're drawing a bunch of cards. You're getting protect markers as well when you re-ride. So yeah, if you get that going, you win pretty hard. If you don't, if the deck totally bricks, you lose. There's a way where you can play it to be pretty aggressive, right? You can run some old cards that, you know, call cards from the damage zone to kind of push damage early. But again, I told you before with the Heal Guardians, you might not want to do that because you're just wasting soul. And, you know, you kind of need soul with this as well to be able to do your multi-attacks. One thing that I've also noticed with Heal Guardians, though, is that although Heal Guardians are actually amazing, right? They just, you know, actually shut down your early turns. Going to late turns, them being 15k shields versus 20k shields is actually a legitimate issue, because a lot of cards you used to be able to, a lot of like attacks used to be just like 20k guard, easy mode, right? But now they're like 15 plus something else, which is really awkward. It's like, it feels like D, right? So the 20k shield actually does really matter. But you know, you kind of want to really trade that because the early game advantages you're getting from Heal Guardians is actually insane. Maybe you could run something like a 3-1 heal, but you know, you're sacrificing consistency in the early game for that. So far I'm still thinking the 4 Heal Guardians are just so good. You don't really care about the 20k shield, but you do feel that 20k shield problem. So, but yeah, that's basically the 4 decks we've tested. The most favorite deck I've actually liked from these 4 is Neo Nectar. Is because it's just, you know, compress and win, right? Compress and win, but sometimes compression is a lie. If you brick with Neo Nectar, it does feel kind of bad. At the same time, you know, Angel Feathers is kind of fun, but you definitely need a lot of thought in the deck, and I don't have a big brain, so it's a bit hard for that. But if you like those slightly more complicated decks, then Angel Feather it seems pretty fun, and it does snowball pretty hard. But yeah, I think we're going to test more this week. That Nubatama card does look insanely awesome. So does OTT. I really like the OTT reveals and the Tachikaze reveals. Yeah, I mean, they look okay. We'll see Spike Brothers tomorrow, and then maybe another card on Friday. But yeah, we'll do more testing, and I will update you guys with the results. Let me know what you guys think. So far, I've just been talking praises on Heal Guardians, how good they are. And yeah, let me know if you've tested and which cards you like so far. And I will see you guys in the next video. All right, bye.